Anyhow, again, welcome to everybody. I have given a variation of this presentation quite a few times over the past couple years now. And I always find that I'm tweaking it a little bit based on additional experiences I've had in mediation. Um, and so I hope that I've, refined it at least a little bit more, that it might, you know, uh, call to you in some way. I try to make this presentation accessible both to a mediator audience as well as to an attorney audience. And looking at the attendee list, I see that we have a really healthy mix of both mediators and attorneys. So I try to make the target audience really anybody. But I will try to mention when I think something is maybe more targeted towards a mediator than, let's say, to an attorney. So let's just jump right in. Presentation, as Jasmine mentioned, is about using mindfulness in mediation and trying to help you stop getting dragged into self-destructive behavior during mediation. So super quickly, I don't want to spend too much time with my background, but as Jasmine mentioned, I've had over 20 years of experience now in the legal industry. I was a Kern County Superior Court Commissioner for a little bit of time, and left the court end of 22 and immediately started my LLM program at the Strauss Institute at Pepperdine in dispute resolution. And I will be thankfully finally graduating in May. Wonderful experience there. And I immediately basically became a full-time mediator and arbitrator. I joined the MCLA panel in 2023. I also joined the ARC mediation panel in 2023. I am also an arbitrator on the American Arbitration Association employment panel, also since 2023. I was, when I was with the court, on the Mindfulness and Wellness Committee, the California Judges Association. And so I have to actually give special credit and thanks to my good friend, retired Judge Paul Bacigalupo, who has been a proponent of mindfulness for many, many years. And so I have to give special thanks to him. I believe he's actually giving a presentation next week. And he has proponent of breathing exercise, meditation, yoga, and certainly mindfulness, of course. And so I have to, like I said, give a special thanks to him for his inspiration and his support the past several years. I'm also a new board member of the Southern California Mediation Association and a co-leader of the SCMA Commercial and Employment Mediation Professional Development Group. I am thanks to Steve Sapassi, another good friend of mine now, an inaugural member of the San Fernando Valley Bar Association ADR Section Committee. And for 3 years, I was an alternate member of the State Bar's Committee on Professional Responsibility and Conduct. So I've always really had a big focus on ethics in my career. And I try to weave that into my presentation as well, as that's certainly something that should be very important for anybody, whether you're a mediator or an attorney. All right, so where I start this presentation is that self-destructive behavior, obviously in and of itself, right? You don't even have to go beyond the wording. Self-destructive behavior is obviously bad. I mean, it's common sense. But why specifically is that bad in mediation, other than the fact that, it could make for a really bumpy ride? It's that it often will lead to impasse, if not always lead to impasse, or certainly has a high potential to lead to impasse, which doesn't really promote settlement in a mediation context. So, what is impasse? I really started the very beginning here with this, to define what exactly is impasse, because I think sometimes what happens is people mistake a roadblock for impasse and are quick to want to give up. It happens all the time, right? We hit a little roadblock and people are threatening to leave right away. Thankfully, that doesn't happen too often to me, but certainly I've seen it happen a lot. So impasse literally is, from the dictionary, a situation in which no progress is possible, especially because of disagreement. It's a deadlock. So you can no longer go any further. I mean, it's a complete impasse, essentially, at that point. And like I said, you have to figure out right off the bat, is it really an impasse or just a temporary roadblock? And this applies to you whether you are the mediator or the attorney. Obviously, if you're the mediator, now you're kind of stuck trying to figure out, can I get any further with these parties, whether it be now or tomorrow or a month from now or whatever the case may be? Or is it just a temporary roadblock? And as the attorney, you want to know if you're spinning your wheels and wasting your time. Obviously, in most cases, you and your client has spent really good money to engage a mediator, and you don't want that to go to waste. Even if you've been referred to MCLA through the MCLA referral program with LA Superior Court, which is obviously at a significant reduced cost, 300 an hour for those minimum 3 hours. That's still money that's gone out the window. You want to make sure that that's not being wasted, obviously. So, as an example, parties are far apart in negotiations. That's normal for pretty much any mediation, right? That's not an impasse. Versus the defendant is refusing to make any type of further offer or even an opening offer, or the plaintiff is refusing to lower their demand any further. That obviously happens a lot, where one party or the other says, no, until they do this, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to change, my number until they change. That happens a lot, especially when there's been some prior acrimonious relationship between the parties or the counsel. In other examples, parties are threatening to leave if blank happens versus the parties are actually leaving. I've seen a number of instances where parties are threatened to leave, but they didn't leave. They say, well, I'm going to leave if this happens. And then basically signaling to you that there's an opportunity to save this. And hopefully they're not using that, to hang that over your head the whole time. But that happens sometimes. And I think in a lot of instances, if not most of those instances, they are legitimately feeling some kind of way about whatever's happened so far. And rightfully feel like this is pretty much the end of the road unless, we can somehow find a way to re-engage. But that's just a roadblock. When they've actually turned off the Zoom and they're gone, it's pretty much the end of the road. And then finally, another example might be, parties are making identical moves. They're just doing the mirroring back and forth. Oh, you're only going to offer 1,000? Fine. We're only going to reduce our demand by 1,000, et cetera, et cetera. Versus they're not making any movement at all. And this one gets a little bit tricky because obviously, might feel some kind of way as the mediator when one party is doing that. And it's like, listen, we only have a half day, for example. We're talking about 6 figures here. I can't do much with $1,000 moves on either side. Sometimes people are really insistent on doing it that way for, whatever strategic reasons they have. And so, we have to try to be a little bit graceful at times and give people their freedom to strategize how they want to. It's not always helpful, but at least they're making moves versus they're literally refusing to make any further move until blank happens, whether it's the other side doing something or whatever the case may be. Now, what causes impasse? I use the Family Feud graphic here because I'd like to say that actually, we asked 100 mediators and attorneys what causes impasse. What were the top answers? This is really just from my own anecdotal experience and talking with folks, but I can't say it was 100 people exactly. So this is in no particular order. These are not ranked, top to bottom. But one, parties' expectations are not being met. That's probably one of the biggest causes of impasse is they've gone into the mediation with a certain thing in mind, and that expectation is nowhere near being met, and now they don't want to waste their time. They have other things to do. They have other cases. They have other stuff going on, and it's not worth their time. So as the mediator, it's really, it behooves you to make sure that you've had a conversation perhaps, about the expectations going in to avoid that happening. But we'll get into how we can prevent these things or overcome them later. Perhaps it's an issue of high conflict personalities running amok. I shorthand that as HCPs. That is not my shorthand. That's Bill Eddy, and I'll get to Bill Eddy in a moment. But that's a specific definition from his book that we'll talk about shortly. But it could be a high conflict personality issue that's resulting in that impasse. Perhaps, and this happens a lot, especially, when you're newer in the mediation world, and I'm just going to my 3rd year as a full-time mediator. So, this still happens with me, of course, especially when, when anybody works with somebody new, you haven't earned the full trust of one or both of the parties or the attorneys. And so sometimes when you're telling somebody, hey, listen, this is the absolute best we can get right now, they might not believe you. They might think that, oh, maybe this person didn't try their hardest. Maybe, they didn't know what to say to push the right buttons or whatever the case may be. They might think that, maybe you maxed out, but that somebody else might have gotten better, or maybe if they reach out directly on their own, they'll get a better result. And so sometimes that happens where there's not a full trust that has been earned, if you will, there that has been you know afforded to the mediator. And so that does happen a lot, especially first time working with somebody. And sometimes you'll get lucky, and there'll be an immediate trust that's built just based on the rapport that you've developed in conversations and text messages, phone calls, just getting the mediation ready to go in the early part of the setup process. And that's great when that happens, because those are the cases that it's almost impossible not to settle. But we'll get into that a little bit more in a little bit. Perhaps one or both of the parties might not be entirely committed to the mediation process, and has ulterior motives. I've seen mediations that have been unsuccessful because somebody outright says, "Listen, I want to see the moves that are made, and that's going to tell me how serious the other side is." They're not actually expecting to settle. They just want to see, if this is a money grab. Sometimes I've seen that on the defense side, where they say, "Oh, I want to see how far up or how far down they're going to come, because I don't think that they're serious. I don't think this is a really strong case. This is just a money grab." Okay, I mean, certainly we can do that, but as the mediator, obviously you're really actually trying to get the case settled, and obviously we always hear that phrase, good faith. We always give everyone the benefit of the doubt that they are legitimately attempting to settle a matter. Or perhaps on the other side of things, that you think, hey, defense wants to start by offering a couple $1,000, and that's not serious. They're just playing around. They're testing us, and we want to show them, we have a we don't want to show all our cards, but we want them to see that we're serious about this case. So that might obviously be happening as well. And then finally, of course, what causes impasse, other than the things I've already talked about, self-destructive behavior, as I call it, by the parties or even the mediator. It's not limited to the parties or the attorneys. The mediators are not perfect. Mediators make mistakes all the time. I know I've made mistakes in the past, and I hope I've been able to cover for them right away. But sometimes you realize that, hey, maybe I pushed a little too hard. Maybe I didn't push hard enough. Maybe I should have taken a different approach earlier on in the process, and now it's too late to backtrack, that sort of thing. Okay, so what is self-destructive behavior? And again, we asked 100 mediators, 100 attorneys, what do you think is self-destructive behavior in mediation? Again, no particular order. And I'm sure you all, right off the top of your head, like, oh, I just had a mediation last week, and this person did this, and I remember, a year ago I had this crazy mediation, and this happened, and whatever. One thing is parties making what the other side might refer to as an insulting offer, and or taking the offers personally. That happens all the time, right? As you go into mediation, say, okay, well, I'm here in good faith, quote unquote. I'm expecting this to go well today. I've prepared my client. We really hope that they're serious, and et cetera, et cetera. This case is 3 years old, 4 years old, whatever. And 2.5 hours in the mediation, you finally get your first offer. Mediator, comes in. Okay, first offer of the day is $1,000, and right off the bat, it's just the fireworks are going off. Like, that's it. This is an insult. We're leaving. Yada yada yada, or vice versa. Defense never got a demand from the plaintiff 3 years into, and I've seen this actually. I mean, shockingly, 2-3 years in mediation, defense says, I've never gotten an actual demand from plaintiff. Okay, great. They didn't convey one prior to the mediation. They didn't share their mediation brief. They have no idea. 2-3 hours into the mediation, we finally get plaintiff's demand. We walk over, as like traditional old school, or on Zoom, you go over to the room, and opening offer, $5 million, right? And then it's like, oh my God, this is crazy. This is ridiculous. That's it. This is, what was the point? We've been sitting here 2-3 hours waiting for an opening demand, and that's crazy. So this is not helpful, right? This is not helpful behavior. Different tact altogether. Maybe the attorneys are being openly dismissive toward their clients. Thankfully, I have not seen this a lot. That would be really troubling to me, but I have seen it on occasion. where the client wants to be involved in the process. And at the end of the day, it is their case, right? I mean, it's their case, so they should be involved. And the attorney is like shushing them or making faces when they're talking, or saying, "Oh, no, no, don't, let's wait till the mediator leaves the room. We'll talk about that after," whatever the case may be. Not a great look, and that might thwart the settlement process, because your client might feel some kind of way, and ultimately they have to give their approval. So you don't want to shut them out of the process. That might be self-destructive. Shooting the messenger. Um, the mediator is just bringing the information, right? They're not the ones who are making the offer. Certainly, I hope not. Maybe that's happened, but when I'm mediating, it's not my offer that I'm conveying. It's the other party's offer. But of course, you're the one who's bringing that information, so of course you're going to take the brunt of it. Oh, why didn't you tell them that's unacceptable, Mr. Mediator, Miss Mediator? Why didn't you get a better number, right? That might happen. And so that can be self-destructive, because guess what? Mediators are humans too. And as calm and peaceful and as zen or whatever we're supposed to be. Mediation is hard work. Not that we're asking for any, special gold star or anything here, but it can take a lot out of you. I mean, a lot. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But when you're working hard, really working hard to try to help both sides, and you're several hours into mediation, that's just been draining, because you're just literally shuttling back and forth, back and forth. The last thing you want is for somebody to attack you because they feel like you're not working hard enough to get them a better result. And so that's something to be careful of, is that's self-destructive. Perhaps not making time for a call with the mediator before the mediation, or refusing to provide a mediation brief. We do maybe see this occasionally, especially with our MCLA mediations, because they're supposedly lower cost, 3 hours or whatever, and sometimes it's like, oh well, we have other stuff going on. There's only a 3 hour mediation or whatever the case may be. We don't really have time to get you a brief. This was on somewhat short notice. Can we just send you, some kind of a demand letter? Can we send you the complaint or whatever the case may be? I don't know if that's really terribly helpful, right? Just taking the time, even if it's a short one, to put together a brief explaining the things that we asked for. Give me procedural history, give me factual history, the relevant history, not the whole story of 20 years ago, but give me the relevant facts, the relevant procedural history. Tell me about prior settlement negotiations, and then give me a rundown of any particular interesting legal or factual issues that are going on here, or anything else that might be relevant that might come up, any discovery related issues, that sort of thing, or whatever. And so we really appreciate, of course, when we get that. I mean, you can tell when somebody's really taken the time to break everything down and give you all the tools you need to try to help them. Because ultimately that's what we're trying to do. When we're trying to help the parties, we need that information. So when you don't make that time to speak to the mediator in advance, when they're trying to schedule you to just even have a 5-minute conversation, I mean, I got to tell you, those calls, as difficult as it can be when you're busy to find time, even if you can just in passing, you're on the road driving somewhere, like, what, hey, let me get this call in. Those five, maybe sometimes those calls can go even half an hour. But I got to tell you, those calls are so absolutely critical for you to get extra context before going into the mediation. And it's one thing when we have a full day mediation, but in a half day mediation, you don't have time to mess around. You got to hit the ground running. You don't have time to spend that half an hour at 10 a.m. with each side. And now you're an hour in, and you were just doing an hour of like info gathering, because the mediation brief was not very clear, or you have questions. I mean, those questions could have been asked and answered during a brief a call the day before, or a couple days before, whatever the case may be. And I found those calls to be incredibly useful. And not just for that reason or for those reasons, but also to build rapport with the attorney. You don't know who you're dealing with when it's just an email. Lots of times we exchange emails with folks. We're doing a million things. Maybe we're a little bit curt in our emails or whatever. And somebody might get a certain impression of you. And then they talk to you on the phone and they're like, wow, you're really cool. You're really easygoing. I didn't expect that based on the emails or whatever the case may be. And they're like, wait, no, I really like you. So that's helpful. because now maybe the person going into mediation is like, oh, this mediator seems really easygoing, seems like they're really sharp, they really know what they're doing. Or as the mediator say, hey, this attorney really knows their stuff, but they're also very realistic. They're not giving me all this fluff and standing on a soapbox and trying to sell me on their case. They're telling me what issues they have in their case. They're being very straightforward, telling me maybe some of the expectations. And we can work together. We can figure this out. So, it really does behoove everybody to make time for those calls. Threatening to leave repeatedly. Definitely not something you want to have going on in your mediation. Like I said, thankfully, I've not had that happen. Maybe more than 2 or 3 times, I want to say, over, 75, whatever, to 100 mediations, whatever it is. And so that's not a good sign. But that, yeah, it's certainly self-destructive. Because one, you're giving an ultimatum. It's not helpful to the process. You're now putting a lot of extra pressure on the mediator, to try to salvage what's going on, and it takes away from the settlement part of it, right? So that certainly self-destructive. My favorite, right? The we're here in good faith, they're not. And inevitably that phrase comes up, right? Almost every mediation, always comes up. We're always the ones here in good faith, and they're always the ones that are not, right? And sometimes I find myself using that phrase, usually to tell people, please don't use this phrase 20 times a day. But constantly going back to that, it's like you're painting yourself as the good guy or the whatever, or the bad guy, or good gal, bad gal, or whatever. I mean, that's not helpful, right? It's us versus them versus us. That's not helpful to build that wall. You're trying to have more of a cooperative mindset. And look, I'm not saying to change your negotiation strategy. If your negotiation strategy is to have a hardline stance, and you want it to come across that way, I get that. That might be your negotiation strategy, but just be mindful of repeating that over and over again. And then finally, and this is just another example. I mean, there could be a list of 10 more of these things, but waiting halfway until halfway through the mediation to reveal that you're not going to be able to agree to any settlement until such and such critical piece of discovery is obtained. But you never mentioned that in the brief. You never mentioned that in the call, and you booked a mediation 3.5 months ago. That's not very helpful. And that does happen. And if it's a legitimate thing, where, when I say legitimate, like a reasonable thing where it's like, for example, you didn't discover that there was this need for this additional discovery until like a week before the mediation when something got dropped in your lap. That is different. That I understand. In fact, I just had this happen. In a case in December, and just before the mediation, there was some additional. It was a personal injury case, and some additional information was provided suggesting that the medical expenses were like double what they were anticipated to be. And so the defense said, "Well, this is a different ballgame now." And on short notice, we can't be prepared for this. Is there any chance we can reschedule? And I was like, sure, I understand. Of course, they had a court imposed deadline, and thankfully, we were able to work things out with the court to get them an extension and reschedule the mediation. But that happens, and you try to be mindful and have some grace with that. So that does happen. It's a legitimate thing that does happen. But if you knew about it the whole time and you didn't say anything, I mean that's not terribly helpful. So let the mediator know. Listen, there's this discovery we've been trying to get for 3 months, and we've been stonewalled, or we can't get it for whatever reason, whatever the case may be. And we really need to do that to be able to do our due diligence. We cannot settle this case without doing this, because just from an ethical standpoint, we have to do our best to represent our client. Everyone understands that. But it would certainly be more helpful to know that in advance. So if you have to reschedule, you can do it at the outset. Okay, now, I referenced Bill Eddy's book, High Conflict People in Legal Disputes is the book I was referencing. Bill Eddy is a lawyer, a therapist, a mediator, and a professor. He teaches now at the Strauss Institute. And in his book, he categorized high conflict personalities, or HCPs, in this following chart that I've shared with you here. And one thing that I loved about this chart, and the reason why I shared, is because you can see some sort of pattern with the bonding that he recommends for how to work with all these types of high conflict personalities, whether borderline, narcissistic, paranoid, histrionic, antisocial, etc. Now, they're not all the same in terms of the bonding, but he suggests friendly tone and body language, as you see, for paranoid high conflict personality, or empathy for histrionic, or reassurance for borderline. So you see that there's some common, pattern there with what are the things that you need to do when you identify what you believe to be a high conflict personality and how to work with that person. Because, for example, if you're the mediator, I mean, you're going to have to figure out a way to work with this person. And if you're one of the attorneys representing a client, and you realize that the opposing attorney or one of the opposing attorneys is a high conflict personality, but you have a serious desire to settle the case for your client's benefit, you're going to have to find a way to work with this person somehow. Now, thankfully, you have the mediator there to try to help you, but there are ways to work with these high conflict personalities, and there are certainly ways not to work with these high conflict personalities that could certainly make things worse. And so, if you get a chance to take a look at his book, it's a very good book. Again, specific to legal disputes, and again, it's high conflict people in legal disputes. All right, so how do you avoid or overcome the self-destructive behavior that we just talked about before, during, or after the mediation? Well, I break it down in these three categories. One being how to avoid impasse before the mediation even begins. So one, provide mediation briefs before the convening calls that you have with the mediator. And you might and should strongly actually consider sharing. Obviously, I don't insist on that. Some mediators do, but I don't. Somebody might really want to share a confidential brief just with me and not with the other side, and I get that. And sometimes one side will share their brief and the other side won't. That happens too. But I do always recommend to consider sharing the brief. It is very helpful at times for the other side to get a crystallized brief summarizing the key pertinent facts, legal issues, maybe a breakdown of damages. It's helpful for them to have that, because what happens is if they don't have that and they never have really received an organized kind of summary of all this information, and now I'm going to the other room saying, well, they say they have this and they have this and they have that. And they're like, well, we've never seen any of that. We've never heard about any of that. Now I'm the one who's essentially, you know, trying to share what was in the brief that was confidential without breaking the confidentiality. I'm having to ask the other side, hey, can I share this? Can I share this? Can I share this? And sometimes that will sidetrack the mediation for an extended period of time, because now I'm trying to distill information over to the other side that perhaps had they just shared the brief, they might have had. And again, maybe you consider sharing a brief and then just separately providing confidential information to the mediator on the side, right? Conduct the convening calls, right? So as I said, when self-destructive behavior is that there's no time made to do those calls, and those calls are very, very, very important for the reasons I previously stated. So try to avoid impasse by just having the calls. Now, look, you could do all these things and you could still get to impasse. I mean, this is not some, foolproof guide. These are just some of the things that I've learned both in my experience, as an attorney, on the bench, as a mediator, and in my LLM studies, and just going to, I don't even know at this point how many dozens and dozens and dozens of webinars and professional development group meetings and conferences, and talking to folks in different in different mediator circles. Like, for example, I've been in the International Academy of Mediators mentorship program for the past couple of years, and getting to sit down with literally the best mediators in the entire world and just pick their brain and go over some of these things with them. So these are things that I've just gained bits of information from different sources and then put them to use in my own practice, and I found them to be useful. But you can do all these things and still reach impasse. But the point is that you do what you can control, and the rest you can't control, right? Which is part of the mindfulness practice that I'll be talking about in a little bit. But you're certainly not helping yourself if you don't do all the things you can control that can help increase the chance that you do not get to impasse. So make those convening calls. Um, Consider texting with the mediator, if you're the attorney, or with the attorneys if you're the mediator, and building an informal rapport. You don't have to do that. That's just my personal practice. I mean, and I'm not saying I text with everybody. In some cases it seems appropriate, in other cases it doesn't come up. I'm not going to go out of my way to insist on somebody texting me, but my point being that there have been times where I haven't specifically told somebody to text me, but I've shared my cell phone number with them in advance, so that way they know how to reach me directly. And I've gotten text in the middle of the mediation from the other counsel that I'm not with at the time saying, hey, something just came up, or, I want to tell you something or whatever. And, you know, generally it seems that when you have that informal connection to somebody with texting, it's like, okay, you have this informal channel with them and they see you as more of a partner. You're having a more informal contact with them as you would a friend or a colleague, versus, let's say, when I'm serving as an arbitrator, I can't have ex parte communication. When I was on the bench, I couldn't have ex parte communications. There's a certain level of informality that you might have, at a morning break when you're sitting on the bench and all the counselors sitting there, and you can chit chat about things in open court with everybody. That's one thing, but you can't go and say, hey, counsel, why don't you come to chambers, but we'll leave everyone else, in the courtroom. So having that kind of direct access to somebody on the side does seem to build a little extra rapport and trust. And that's something you really do need as a mediator. And certainly as the mediator, getting that from the attorney, that makes you feel like, hey, they're taking this seriously, and they're giving you a little bit of trust that they're having that informal rapport with you. um, Definitely you want to share honest thoughts and concerns during those calls. It might be part of your style to be very fluffy and optimistic during those calls, and I'm not saying to be the grim reaper. You shouldn't tell anybody when you have those convening calls that, hey, your case is DOA, it's not going to settle tomorrow, but we'll try our best, and it was still nice to meet you. I mean, obviously that's not very helpful to do that, but my point being that I'm not disparaging, but I've seen mediators who will literally wait till the 11th hour to show up with all the warts of one side's case and dump it on them all at once late in the game to try to somehow, you know, I don't want to say intimidate them, but essentially now all of a sudden worry them into maybe, lowering their numbers, or whatever the case may, or increasing their numbers depending on who you're talking to. I don't do that. I'm not a fan of that. And again, I'm sure there are perfectly successful mediators who do that, and that might be perfectly fine. But my thought is, it's better to share those honest thoughts and concerns at the beginning. Let them know, hey, listen, I read your brief. Um, I have a question. I think I'm missing something here. Can you please just, explain this to me? Or can you please share your theory of liability as to XYZ? Because guess what? If you're thinking that, the other side's thinking that, and it's going to come up. And you don't want to be put on the spot in the middle of the mediation to have to explain something that was a clear, glaring, issue, and you're not sure how to explain it. I know early on I learned the hard way, that when there is some glaring, obvious issue, and you don't have a good explanation from the other side, and the other side now is cross-examining you about it, and you're trying to come up with some explanation and not look like you don't know what's going on. I mean, it doesn't look good, right? And you don't have to make up a story either. That's not good either. You don't want to lie. So better to find that information out early on, during the convening calls, and be honest. Say, listen, I want to help you, but I need you to help me with XYZ as well. If you're the attorney, share with the mediator that your client might be, and I hate to say difficult, but they might need some hand holding, or maybe they need a space to vent. We talk often about empathy and mediation. I mean, genuine, empathy, obviously, not the condescending, empathy of like, oh, I know it's been really hard for you. That's great, but okay, we need to keep moving. I mean, that's not helpful. But listen, if the case can't get settled unless the attorney's client can have their day to be heard, and they're not going to go to court if they settle, right? So this is now their day to be heard. You got to let them have their day to be heard. Now, obviously, you can't let them hijack the process, but if they need to just vent for 20 minutes, then guess what? You got to let them vent. If they got to cry, they got to cry. Whatever it is, if that's what's going to get the case settled, then you need to hear them, you need to listen to them, and you need to honestly accept what they have to say and give them that grace, if you will. Because maybe it's an employment case. I mean, the employment cases that I handle with wrongful termination claims, and the case has been going on for years. Maybe the person worked for the company for years, and they have a lot of hurt feelings. They feel some kind of way about it. Guess what? Chances are they might need to speak their piece, and they're not going to maybe get to speak their piece to the other side, right? That may not be meant for that to happen. In the process, you're going to have to be the one to let them speak their piece. And by shushing them or telling them, okay, well, we don't have time for that or whatever, that's self-destructive. As the mediator, do that. And as the attorney, to not let your client have that forum, that could be self-destructive as well. So you want to find that out in advance of the mediation if that needs to happen. Plenty of the time, the attorneys say, no, you know what? My client's good. They're over it. They're ready to do business. They're super easy to get along with. They're great. Wonderful. But at least you know that in advance. Share with the mediator about your prior dealings with opposing counsel. And if you're the mediator, you should ask about that because sometimes the issue is a personal one between the attorneys. It has nothing to do with the litigants. And you hope that that's not the case, but you might want to know that in advance because that does rear its ugly head quite a bit. And if there haven't been any prior settlement negotiations, you really should consider having, and I mentioned this earlier, having a demand conveyed before the mediation to avoid sticker shock. Now, of course, you can't force anybody to do anything, but you should seriously consider it just because you want them to have a heads up going in. So that might be something that if it hasn't happened already, you might want to make sure that's happened. Now, alternatively, and I don't have this as a bullet point here, but if there have been prior negotiations, gosh, I had a case a few months ago. I don't remember now off the top of my head, but I want to say there had been maybe 6 998s, maybe 8 99. I mean, it was an incredible number of 998s that had gone back and forth over like 2-3 years. I had to draw a chart because, as any of you know, with 998s, I mean, that can get really, really, really tricky. And so I had to sit there and literally do like a diagram of all these 998s because guess what? It's going to come up during the mediation. And they're like, oh, well, we're going to definitely beat this number. Okay, maybe we wouldn't have beat, but we're definitely. And so, if you're not aware of that, oh my God, you're in a world, going to be in a world of hurt. So you need to be aware of all that, to be aware of that prior back and forth. And I'll tell you what, there are some cases where you should start from scratch, but there are plenty of cases where don't make your job harder. They've already done all this negotiation. They're already at this number and this number. You might want to ask them if they're willing to pick back up from where they were, because guess what? I'd say 9 times out of 10, if not 99 out of 100, the parties say, we're good with that. And guess what? Those cases get settled because you already have had work done for you by the parties themselves. Let's just jump right back in. Now, I'm not saying to do that automatically, but you should always consider that because those are the cases that you've already had some of the work done for you. Why reinvent the wheel? So just something to consider. All right. Now, how to avoid impasse during your opening. So the opening is, the day of the mediation, you turn on the Zoom if it's on Zoom, or you're walking into the rooms if you're in person, and you have your opening spiel, if you will, with both sides or however you want to call it. One thing that was shared with me, and I'm not, again, I always give credit to the folks that have shared these things with me, but this is a Steve Rotman saying, and he teaches at the Strauss Institute as well, and he's a well-known mediator in the employment realm. And one thing that I learned early on from him that I thought was frankly, I'd never heard it before, I never thought about it, is that failure in mediation isn't, the case doesn't settle. If the case doesn't settle at mediation, that doesn't mean it's a failure. What the failure is if both parties, or maybe one of the parties, but both parties, they leave the mediation and they don't know what it would take to settle the case. If you haven't at least achieved that for the parties, that's when you've failed. And I tell people that. I said, listen, if nothing else today, let's try to make progress. And at the end of the day, if nothing else, let me at least find out what it would take for you to get this case settled. That is valuable information. Even if you don't think this can settle it, let me at least do that for you. There are times when people are at the point where they are ready to give up and don't want to leave, and I will at least salvage that and say, listen, at the very least, give me the rest of the time to find this information out for you so it doesn't feel like a failure. I can't magically gap $1,000, $100,000 gap. If we're 100,000 apart, we're 100,000 apart, despite all the movement. But let me at least find out what it would take to settle the case so that you know what your options are now. And then I will do the follow-ups to see if I can bridge that gap so that you know what your options will be later. But let me at least get that. I mean, that's currency. That's helpful information. Perhaps you, and speaking of that point, set up the possibility of there not being a settlement by the end of mediation, but that maybe there's a mediator's proposal that might help, or maybe you're just doing follow-ups for a while. I have settled so many cases in weeks and months, even after, of just constant following up with the attorneys, phone calls, emails, text messages. I mean, it is exhausting at times. I mean, there are cases where I've spent more time doing follow-ups than the time actually at the mediation, and I've never charged for any of that time. Now, I'm not telling everybody to basically do everything pro bono, but I'm just really persistent, really stubbornly persistent when it comes to helping folks get their cases settled. In fact, it's funny, I don't think she's on today. Maybe she is, but there's an attorney that I've worked with a few times now, or a couple times now, and she was just telling me yesterday, we were talking about another case that we have coming up together, and she was telling me that when I was doing those follow-ups with her on the first case we had together, that she was so annoyed that she's like, "Oh my God, this mediator's not like leaving me alone. He keeps trying to follow up. I'm over it. This case is going to settle. Like, I don't want to do anymore, whatever." And she said she was so close to just being done with it. And she said that she couldn't believe that I kept going and going, and we got the case settled. And that she was ecstatic. And she said that in that moment, that's when she was like, okay, I appreciate that he put in that time, even though I was annoyed because I didn't see the pathway, and he kept at it until the pathway was there. And so, that's something you can control. I don't give up on any case, even the ones that I don't think this case is ever going to settle. I still follow up, and until I know absolutely like there's nothing else that can be done. So, maybe you mention that, maybe you tell them that, because you don't want to have that disappointment of, and it's not so much for the attorneys, they know they do this, right? You don't need to patronize them. It's for their clients, right? If their client has not been in a mediation before, they're thinking, maybe they haven't had that talk with the attorney. Maybe the attorney didn't tell them that, right? They're thinking if the case doesn't settle today, oh my God, what are we going to do now? We have to go to trial, and it causes them some unnecessary stress. So I can't tell you how many times I've told them that, and you can see the look on their face, like, oh, okay, good to know. Oh, thank you for doing that. Oh, we appreciate it. Okay, great. So that might help you in giving them some peace of mind. And again, just as I just mentioned, do not patronize the attorneys or their clients. Nobody likes that. I know that we want to play Jedi mind tricks with everybody, right? And then play some kind of trick on them to somehow convince them that they should settle the case. But guess what? They're smart. All these folks went to law school. They passed the bar. Some of them have been practicing longer than you have. There's no need to patronize them. They know what's going on. You're going to get much better traction when you're honest with them about what you're doing, and you think of them as a partner and not somebody who you're trying to trick. But I've seen that before. I've been on that side of it as the attorney years ago, where I was like, I know exactly what you're doing. I get you want to put on a show for my client, but don't insult me along the way, because you're not helping the process here. Okay, now you're in the mediation, you've reached some kind of impasse. How do you overcome it? One, and this is where mindfulness comes in, consider taking a break, go for a walk, go meditate, grab snack, grab a snack, grab coffee, whatever. I know that might seem silly, but you're on Zoom. Everyone's at home or in their office. They don't know what you're doing. When they don't see you, they assume that you're with the other side, and obviously most of the time you are. But if you're like me, I don't take breaks during the mediation. If it's a full day, I'm not taking a lunch break. I'm going the whole time. I mean, there are times when I have to remember, oh, maybe I should, go to use the restroom for a second at some point. Oh, maybe I need a sip of water. But I get really caught up, and I know a lot of my colleagues do as well. But you might come to a point where you start to get frustrated because guess what? You need water, you need a snack, you need to go use the restroom, and you might not catch yourself getting aggravated. You might not catch yourself getting frustrated with, oh, one side's being more or less stubborn and it's getting you upset. You need to be mindful of that. You need to realize that in the moment and say, what I need is to go step away for 10 minutes and not think about the case. Or maybe I need to step away and strategize for 10 minutes. But whatever it is, you might want to consider stepping away and getting whatever you need to recharge. Maybe you talk to one or both of the attorneys alone. I always create an attorneys only breakout room on Zoom. Obviously in person, there are times when you step away and speak to the attorneys in a separate room or in a hallway or whatever. But maybe you need to talk to somebody to figure out, okay, what's really going on here? What is all the vitriol for? I don't understand. What am I missing? Because there are times when there's something clearly going on that you can tell that is below the surface. And maybe because of who else is in the Zoom room with you, they can't quite tell you. It's like a wink, wink sort of thing. So maybe you need to find out on the side. Maybe that's where the texting comes in handy. I've had attorneys tell me, listen, I can't. I gotta put on a little bit of show for the client here. But if you want to talk separately, I'll let you know what's going on. You never know. You never know. Maybe you need to adjourn the mediation early and resume at a later date. And I know this is not savory. That's not, I never like doing this, but if something comes up, and again, we talked about discovery earlier, but maybe it's something that came up that they weren't really aware of, or that, maybe something that was mentioned that, whatever the case may be, maybe now you need a month to go and get that. Maybe it's not even really a discovery issue. I just settled a case this week, or maybe it was the end of last week. Sorry, I should be better on track of my calendar. But anyhow, I think it might have been Friday last week. Anyhow, it's not important. Point being that it was a case that it had a mediation. The numbers, it was a personal injury case. The numbers didn't quite match up for both sides. And one side said, listen, the defense side says, listen, we'd consider a bigger number, but we need some additional substantiation for these damages. We've not received any documents to really support this. And the attorney, unfortunately, and his client didn't have the documents just immediately ready. And I said, listen, I don't want to waste the next hour or so you trying to dig up records. I will happily give you folks the last hour of today, bank that time, do it on another day once you've been able to provide it. And both parties said, great. We rescheduled. Some documents were provided before we reconvened that second time. Defense counsel said, listen, we got these records, but we need something more. This doesn't look so great. Okay, go back to plaintiff's counsel. Let's reschedule it again. No problem. I'll find you another hour somewhere. Don't worry about it. Can you go and dig up actual bank records and this and that, whatever that they want to see something, more like that? No problem. Plaintiff's counsel goes and does the work with his client, gets these bank records, like 100-page of bank records, gets it over to defense counsel. We get back on Zoom finally now, that second rescheduled session, and boom, we're able to make a bigger offer. Plaintiff accepts it, case got settled. And it was great. Everyone was happy. It worked out. I had no obligation to do that. I could have said, hey, listen, we're done. You're booked for today. Whatever. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn or anything. I'm just saying, like, you have control over that. If I had said, no, we're here today, today's the mediation, and if you don't have these records, good luck. You should probably consider giving them. And if you need me down the road, let me know. They might not have ever contacted me. That case might have gone to trial or might have spent another 6 months in litigation because we weren't willing to put in that time to step away and get what needed to get done for this case to be able to settle. So maybe you need to consider doing that at times when you feel like you're about to hit a brick wall and you're not going to be able to break through it. Maybe you might consider doing something like that. Maybe you need to lower the temperature in one or both of the break rooms if you're the mediator. I've many times done this where I've shared that the opposing party, and this is not me making things up. They've actually said, listen, we have nothing against them. They were perfect, they were a perfectly nice employee when we were here. We're sorry about how things turned out. you'd be amazed sometimes at how nice people are talking about each other in the other room. Everyone assumes the other side is, talking trash about them, right? And they'll imagine that, right? A lot of competitive type A personalities, we're often programmed to think, oh, the other side is this, that, whatever. It gives us a chip on the shoulder. It drives us, right? It fuels us. But it may all be projection, or it may all be something we've made up in our minds to get ourselves motivated. It may not actually exist, right? And so to find out that, oh, as it turns out, they really are saying nice things about you. They're no hard feelings. That might bring the temperature down. And for the attorneys, you might want to consider that. The other side might not necessarily be your enemy, and having a good rapport with the other side and not think of them as being the enemy might help. Now, listen, if bad things have happened between you, that's a different story, and that's something else we have to work through. But if it's not actually there, don't make it be there when it's not. That's self-destructive, certainly. Um, as the mediator, you might consider maybe even as a last ditch effort a hypothetical settlement range. You might be far apart and say, listen, let me just break it down to you. If I can at least get you X number, if I can at least get you X number, would you consider it? If I can get to this range, if I get, and many times dipping your toe in the water is what's going to let you know that, what, there is a path forward, there is a way to get there, because you can tell from the reaction to you dropping those numbers or those clues that it wasn't an immediate, like, ugly face, rejected, absolutely not. There was like, okay, they might think about that. Other side said the same thing. Okay, now you might be able to get there, but you have some work to do. And I have to, of course, give credit to one of my dear friends and mentors, Stacey Hausner. That's something that she does all the time, and she's mastered that. I think so. I think that's always a good option as well. And finally, you might consider what I call holistic negotiating. Now, I'll only take credit for the term holistic. I don't even know why I use this term, to be honest. If it's not appropriate, I don't, I'm sorry about that. I think that I would consider this to be holistic in my mind. But Mike Young and Steve Rotman and others, they're big proponents of the notion of settling cases in 3 moves or less. Now, I don't think of it as 3 moves or less. I think of it as, I would rather spend most of the time early on in the mediation process figuring out the big picture items. What are the things that are going to hold up our mediation today? Is it a discovery issue? Is it damage calculation? I mean, is it whatever it is? Let's work through those things, because there are things that if they're not addressed and settled, you're going to have parties, totally opposite ends. And unless you settle whatever that is, that's some theory of liability, maybe somebody has a misunderstanding of the law or whatever it is, we need to figure out what those things are and get those cleared up. Then we have to decide, once we've cleared those things up, can we get to this basic range, this much smaller range? Is this a realistic way for this case to resolve? And you need to get some measure of commitment from the parties that, okay, we're not there now, but this is kind of where we think that, yeah, that's probably where the case should settle. If you can get there, then once you get there, settling the case might take 2, 3, 4 moves or something. I've had cases settle in no moves. Literally, I spent the whole time working everyone to a place where we got to a final number. Now, that's not the norm. Obviously not. But plenty of cases settled 1 move, 2 moves, 3 moves, whatever. And if nothing else, the process is so much smoother, and you avoid a lot of the hurt feelings. You avoid all the quote unquote insulting offers, all that sort of thing. It is a bit of an art form, and it's going to take me a while to perfect it, and you'll never perfect it, right? It's always in flux. But I really give credit to the Mike Youngs and the Steve Rotmans of the world who've been pushing this alternative, like I said, holistic negotiating style. Because I honestly, when they first told me about it, I thought, no way, that's not going to work. No, it's impossible. Until one day I was pretty much close to an impasse, and I said, you know what, I have absolutely nothing to lose. And I tried doing it some way like that, and it worked. And I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. And so ever since then, I've only done things this way, and it has made my mediations run so much smoother. And I want to say, I can't really think of any mediations where the parties have agreed to go this route, which is basically 99 out of 100, where the parties the whole time haven't been in a good mood and haven't been feeling like there's always progress, or there's hope or optimism. Now, not to say that I've settled 100% of those cases. Some have not settled, of course, for whatever reason, but at least the process wasn't painful the whole way through. And you're really trying to avoid that because that doesn't help. There's no reason that you have to make it so painful. Now, I'm sure somebody would take a painful mediation if at the end of the day it got settled, but at the same time, if you can settle it without having to make it painful, even better. Okay, so that gets us to mindfulness. What is mindfulness? Well, according to the American Psychological Association's Dictionary of Psychology, mindfulness is defined as awareness of one's internal states and surroundings. And it's to help people avoid destructive or automatic habits and responses by learning to observe their thoughts, emotions, and other present moment experiences without judging or reacting to them. One other iteration of mindfulness that I really liked, and this is just another one here that I've cited to from an article by Daniel Forjan, Michelle Ataki, and Yikong Lee, called Problem Solving and Affect as Mechanisms Linking Daily Mindfulness to Task Performance and Job Satisfaction. It's a 2020 article. They specifically were analyzing the workplace context as an example, and they said in 40 studies that evaluated mindfulness-based intervention in work context, almost all report statistically significant improvement in employee health and well-being. Now, in the legal context, then this is out of an Advocate 2016, believe it or not. So this is a while ago. It's almost 10 years ago. Mediators Mark Fingerman and Ralph Williams wrote an article called "Use Mindfulness to Do Better at Mediation." So this goes back quite a ways. So, like I said, the Paul Bacigalupo's and Mark Fingerman's, Ralph Williams of the world, they've been talking about this for a long time, and I'm sincerely grateful to them for that. But one really great analogy that they used is that you're not foregoing judgment or other evaluative thoughts about a subject just because you're trying to be in the present moment. It's that you simply set aside that thinking for that moment because it's like studying a painting to see how it was made. Regardless of whether or not you like it, you're seeing the overall image and then drilling down on the details, the gradation of colors, the thickness of the paint, the type of brushstrokes used, the use of shadow and perspective. And that's because lawyers are typically very good at paying attention. But the tendency is paying attention with a preconception and an agenda in mind. Litigators are looking for, okay, how is this going to hurt my case? How is it going to help my case? How can I use this? And they're predisposed to quickly reacting to any ideas that are contrary to their goals and how they see the case. So mindfulness can be especially helpful for us as litigators or former litigators that are essentially trained and are predisposed to thinking a certain way because we're trying to evaluate and formulate a response, right? And people will say, oh, you always have an answer for everything, right? That's what they always tell you. You always have, well, no good lawyer does not have an answer for everything because all we're trying to do is have a plan A, have a plan B, have a plan C, have a plan D, et cetera, et cetera. The best attorneys have a plan A through Z because you always got to know that there are all these things that are happening and this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. You're trying to do your best to represent your client. And that means always having another plan available to you and an answer for whatever gets thrown your way. That's what you do, right? But in mediation, that sometimes can hinder you. And so that's where mindfulness really comes into play. Now, one of the seminal, articles on mindfulness in the legal context came from Professor Leonard Riskin, who anyone who's done any work in the mediation realm or has done any studies in the mediation realm knows who Professor Leonard Riskin is. But in 2002, he published an article in the Harvard Negotiation Law Review called "The Contemplative Lawyer on the Potential Contribution of Mindfulness Meditation to Lawsuits, Lawyers, and Their Clients." And he posited in the article that mindfulness can help law students and lawyers in two primary ways. One, to address high levels of unhappiness, stress, and depression, which I don't have to recount all of the statistics that are out there about how attorneys are in the top 5 of all these really bad categories for health issues and all these things. But second, to help lawyers avoid opportunities to provide the most appropriate service to some clients. So this is where the ethics come in. Mindfulness can really help you do your best to serve your clients from an ethical standpoint, because it'll help you pay attention to things that maybe before you didn't have your attention on. And as he points out, narrow adversarial mindsets tend to dominate the way that most lawyers think and the way most legal education is structured. And they promote egocentric behavior, excessive adversarialism, and a lack of balance between personal and professional aspects of life, which often lead to unhealthy levels of stress, experience of isolation, emptiness, etc. So mindfulness can be helpful to you not just in your mediation, but just more globally. In one of my favorite studies in this realm from 2011 called Extraneous Facts and Judicial Decisions, um, uh, the authors of that study are the I guess psychologists or researchers, if you will, of that study, who I've named here, Shai Danziger, Jonathan Levav, and Laura Abnam-Pesso, reviewed 1,112 rulings over 50 days during a 10-month span by 8 judges who preside over 2 different parole boards in Israel. And they found that the likelihood of a favorable ruling was greater at the very beginning of the workday or after a food break, which you think, oh my God, it can't come down to that until you realize, oh yeah, it does. And their study showed that about 65% of the rulings were in favor of the plaintiff at the beginning of each session. That's the morning, after breakfast break, and after lunch break. And they gradually decreased to 0 to 10% at the end of each session. And they concluded that the repeated rulings that the judges were making depleted their mental resources, causing them to have a higher likelihood of granting parole in the first cases after a break. And really, at the end of the day, it comes down to the judges should take meal breaks so they can benefit from the effects of a short rest, positive mood, and glucose on mental resource replenishment. So actually, yes, that alone could have an impact. So when I say take a break, go get a snack, coffee, or whatever, um, whether you're the attorney or the mediator, either way, you literally could be helping your client do better by having a snack. And I know sometimes to distill it down to that simple a thing seems rather silly, but it is the absolute truth. So, how can you use mindfulness to avoid or overcome impasse resulting from self-destructive behavior? And so this is where I'm not going to go too heavy, on the on reading the slides because it is a lot and it's a mouthful. So I'm just going to highlight some things out of a bunch of different studies. So there aren't a ton of, as you can imagine, there aren't a ton of studies on mindfulness with respect to mediators, at least not since last time I did the research some months back. And recently when I took another look, I did not find any, but that doesn't mean that there haven't been any. I don't know that for a fact. I would like to see more out there. But I've taken essentially the analogous studies from mindfulness with judges, and I think that there's a lot there that we can make use of. So, for example, in Minding the Court, Enhancing the Decision-Making Process, the authors of that study, that article, they noted that the prevalent use of heuristics by judges in order to make decisions more quickly resulted in the presence of cognitive biases, such as anchoring. So that is like you have a busy calendar, you're nonstop going, going, going. You have to find some heuristics, right, to make that process move a little bit quicker. Whether it's, you have a spiel that you use or a formula that you're following all the time. But that can obviously lead to cognitive biases. And so mindfulness is obviously helpful in reducing bias. But after they, pointed out the well-settled beliefs that fatigue, depleted resources, multitasking, lower performance, kind of like the study from Israel just mentioned, and in a negative move as well, that can inhibit the processing of information. They suggested that the best solution for judges is to embrace mindfulness. Take a step back, focus on what is the higher purpose of what you're doing. Catch yourself when you're, maybe looking down at your script instead of noticing that the defendant or the plaintiff or whoever in front of you is having a mental breakdown, is crying, is emotional, is not appearing to agree with what they said. Oh, they agreed to some settlement agreement, they agreed to a plea bargain deal, whatever it is. And but you're not paying attention to them, you're just focusing on, okay, next. And so they found that mindfulness could be helpful in those cases. In 2016, Judge Jeremy Fogel became one of the first major judicial advocates of mindfulness when he published Mindfulness in Judging. And he said in that article that cultivating and practicing mindfulness is a natural and accessible process, perhaps because of its popular association with meditation, yoga, etc. But some may think of mindfulness as an element of a particular cultural style or worldview, but it's not. Looking at mindfulness in that way, like, oh, that's part of the yoga meditation sort of stuff. That's not my thing. Thinking of it that way, you're really missing an opportunity. And he said it really misapprehends the nature of mindfulness, because the purpose is not to tell one what to think or do, but rather to help one think and act as one chooses, with the benefit of deeper reflection and more fully conscious intent. So it's not, oh no, in order to be more enlightened, with your mindfulness, you need to go do yoga, you need to do this. No, it's literally just stopping for a second, taking a deep breath and thinking about, okay, what's going on here? Am I missing something because I'm focusing on 50 million things? It literally can be as simple as that. In one other article, law professor Clark Freshman, who's also a proponent of Judge Fogel's mindfulness advocacy, published an article called Mindful Judging, the Science of Attention. And in his article, his key findings were that mindfulness increased the attention and optimized emotion. Mindfulness helped catch lies and uncover deeper truths and help reduce bias. And he specifically noted that mindfulness was a gateway to emotional awareness, compassion, and kindness, which not only benefited the judges themselves in promoting their own sense of happiness, but also the litigants who appeared before them. So you could see the application of that mindfulness practice to lawyers being able to better serve their clients, whether it be in the mediation room or outside the mediation room, or for the mediators who could better serve the attorneys and the litigants that they work with. So, obvious segue here. What does this mean for you? Well, I have a list of some tips and tools perhaps that might be of help to you. One, practice meditation or breathing. I mentioned Judge Bacigalupo earlier. I will remember the very first time that I met him. It was at the first meeting I attended, Zoom meeting I attended for the Mindfulness and Wellness Committee, and I got on a little early. I just gotten off the bench. I literally ran to chambers, my robe still on, turned on the Zoom. I hadn't even taken the robe off. And I had been nonstop, go, go, go the whole morning. And I sat down, I was like, oh God, I got to get in this meeting. And I was just, overstimulated from court. And, I met him, found that we had some common friends on the bench. And when we started the meeting a few minutes later, he said, okay, I want everyone to, sit back, close your eyes, we do a breathing thing. And I'm like, oh God, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, great. What is this going to, I don't want to close my eyes. What's 5 minutes of breathing going to do? Like, this is so silly. And I had that mindset. So it's like, oh, this meditation, yoga, whatever stuff. Like, obviously I joined the committee for a reason, but in the moment I was thinking like, I'm so overstimulated from court. I'm annoyed by any number of things that happened. And what is this going to do for me? And I swear, those were like the 5 best minutes of my day. Might have been the 5 best minutes of my week. I mean, amazingly, just closing my eyes, putting my head back in my chair, and just letting go of everything and just being in that moment, that very moment without thinking about anything else, really allowed me to de-stress and to bring everything back to center. And it was amazing. And I thanked him greatly for that. And I always remind him about that. And as silly as even now, I know saying it, I'm like, oh, they're probably, a bunch of folks on the Zoom that are like, oh yeah, that's great, Anthony. Like that's still, that is still silly. Like that's not going to work for us. But I didn't think it would work for me either until I did it. Now, and I'm not saying that I do that all the time. In fact, I usually don't really do that. But in that moment, it was very helpful to me. So you just got to find what works for you. Don't take other work or your personal life with you to the mediation. That happens a lot, right? Folks have other things going on, personal things, other work things. It's not helpful, right? Certainly if you're the mediator, you absolutely cannot do that because you have to give 100%, right? 100%. You have to give in mediation, and which is why I say that people don't realize how hard it is. Because if you're really giving yourself 100% to the process to help folks out, you're literally giving every last thing you have. You're not playing with your phone, you're not doing other work, you're not doing emails. Everything is focused on just how you can help these folks out, and it takes a lot out of you. And sometimes, the mediator's distracted. Maybe sometimes the attorney's distracted. I, I had an attorney recently. We actually got the case settled, so I shouldn't complain. But the attorney had some other thing going on and had to step out of the room and had a colleague jump in kind of last minute to take over the mediation. And I was like, okay, well, I haven't spoken to this person. I don't know you, but I hope it all works out. It did, thankfully. But I mean, try not to have other things going on, during the mediation that, try to be able to focus just on the one thing that's going on there. Maybe you consider yoga or some other physical exercise. Probably the greatest thing that I ever did, these past couple years was I started doing hot yoga. Now I've been doing yoga for like 18 years, but more on my own and not necessarily in a group setting or in a studio. But I decided to start going. I started going to hot yoga in I want to say June, July of 22 when I was still on the bench, and because I was up in Kern County, I was only able to go to the studio, which was down in LA, once a week, maybe on the weekend, if I was even down here for the weekend. And that 1 hour was incredible. But I thought, man, I wish I could go to this all the time because I could see the immediate benefit of it. But you do 1 hour, and then the next day you're right back to where you were, right? When I started going 5, 6 days a week, I noticed a huge impact in my ability to be more mindful and to be able to really focus in on just one little thing that's right in front of you, because that's what you do in the yoga studio. You're not supposed to think about anything else, not focusing on anyone else in the room. Focus literally on just the one thing you're doing right in that moment. And so that was incredibly helpful to me. Obviously, that's what calls out to me. Other folks, might, you know, do weightlifting, or maybe it's golf. I mean, I play golf too. Golf is great. Whatever it is, whatever activity it is, find something where you can go and just decompress so that when you do show up at mediation, you are your best self. Uh, be kind, be courteous, be humble. I know these all seem like common sense things, but sometimes, again, we get caught up in the moment, we get overstimulated, we get aggravated, and we don't realize that we're being curt with somebody. Maybe we're being unprofessional, maybe we're not being entirely polite, or whatever we're doing. That's why mindfulness is great. Stop for a second. Okay, think, what did I just tell this person? Okay, maybe I need to rephrase that. Maybe I need to take a different tone. Maybe I need to have a different attitude. If you don't catch yourself in the moment, it might be too late by the time you realize, oh, the next day, like, oh man, I was really in a bad mood yesterday during the mediation. I wish I hadn't been like that. Well, it might be too late now. So that's why mindfulness is great, because it makes you have to analyze what you're doing in that moment, just from the context of what's happening in this very moment. And oh, I need to check myself. Be curious. Maybe you're not the one who needs to check yourself. Maybe it's something going on with the other side. So maybe instead of immediately assuming that when you get some really, unfair number sent back to you, if you want to call it that, or unreasonable number as you might, think it is, maybe there's something else going on. Don't I mean, look, sometimes it is literally what's on the surface, and sometimes it isn't. But at least be open to the fact that there might be something else going on, and be curious about it. Certainly, as the mediator, you really should be the one who's the most curious, more so than the attorneys necessarily, because you should be thinking about, why are they acting this way? Why are they moving in these ways? Maybe you need to ask and find out. So don't just take the number and run with it. Maybe you need to stop and figure out, why is this happening? Because maybe there's something else going on. Maybe there's a discovery issue. Maybe there's some other issue that you were not made aware of. Perhaps I've had this happen before. The attorneys have other cases with each other, and they're thinking about, oh, well, we just had a case and they did the same thing, and then the last minute they changed their tune, so I know that's how they operate. No, it's not. I mean, if that just, maybe it's their MO, but maybe it's not. I mean, you don't always know that, but you don't know that that's what the attorney's thinking. So you need to find out, why are they acting this way? Oh, it's because I know that this is what they're going to do, so now I'm acting this way because I know that's what's going to happen with them. But you wouldn't have known that unless you had probed. So you need to be curious. Be patient. Patience, very important. In fact, and I thought I would maybe avoid all my sports references, but unfortunately, I'm going to get one. I just read an article today about the Lakers trading for Luka Doncic, and they interviewed Jeannie Buss, and she said that her father, Dr. Jerry Buss, who was a well-known poker player, always taught her that it's just like poker. You need to be really patient, but when the opportunity presents itself, you need to be super aggressive, 0 to 100. And so I was like, I love that analogy. And so same thing. You need to be patient. You can't force the issue, but when the opportunity is there to strike, you have to be able to go full force when it's there. But otherwise, you need to be patient through the process. And notice when you're getting antsy and you're being too aggressive, you need to take a step back. Never react in kind or overreact. Don't forget to breathe. It's just like, if you feel like sending a nasty email, draft it and then just set it aside and come back to it later. And then that's when you realize, okay, I can't send this email, and you delete it. When people talk about that, same thing. Don't overreact. Don't react in kind. And you know what? Sometimes it's not about you. It's not always about you, right? It's not your case. Maybe if you're the attorney, it's not your case, it's your client's case. If the other side is doing something, it may not be about you. Don't take it personally. And on that point, great segue to remember why you're in mediation. If you're the attorney, it's your client's case, and so try to keep that in mind. If you're the mediator, try to keep in mind that as much as it's like, oh, it's you think of it as, oh, it's a game, I have to solve this puzzle to get the settlement. It's somebody's livelihood, perhaps. It's somebody's financial well-being. It's a company's viability, or whatever the case may be. What is the greater purpose for what's going on? You have to keep that in mind. Tell parties not to be afraid of concessions. If any of you have read the book Influence by Robert Cialdini, it's a very popular book. But even if you haven't, he references a 1972 UCLA social psychology study that found that folks who started from a very strong position, very firm, strong, but then made concessions were the most successful in negotiating, as opposed to ones who just took up any other position but refused to make any concessions whatsoever because perhaps they started out at a more conservative number, but then they never wanted to concede anything. Say, well, I've already made my concession. Those folks didn't do as well ultimately. So tell parties, don't be afraid to make concessions. They actually work, and they will benefit from that in the long run. So use that. Be aware of recency bias. Will lightning strike twice? Just like I was mentioning earlier, there might have been some other case, right? That's the elephant in the room. I had a case once, an employment case, where the defendant, the owner of the company, said, "Oh, I just had a case against some big hotshot plaintiff's counsel, and we did X, Y, Z, and they walked away with nothing. They dismissed the case. So, hey, great, congratulations, but guess what? That has nothing to do with today's case. Like that's wonderful, but you're putting all your eggs in that basket of recency bias, and that's not helping you. So, I mean, a good thing I figured out that that's why he was being, so adamant about his position. But people sometimes have some kind of recency bias from some other success, and you got to be aware of that. And remember, finally, that the mediator is your best friend, and please use him or her. We're partners in the process. Let us help you. We can't help you if you don't let us help you. So that would be always one of my biggest piece of advice, is to let us help you out. So thank you all for attending. Thank you to MCLA. It's been my honor and pleasure to be on the panel these past couple of years. We just had a wonderful first annual MCLA dinner last night. I'm not sure how many of you were there, but we had a great time, and we look forward to bigger and better things going forward. And Jasmine, I don't know if we have any questions, but I'm happy to answer any questions that may have come up while I was presenting.
All right. That was a great presentation, Anthony. That was a very
Thank,
refreshing point of view that you were
thank you,
sharing.
Jasmine. Thank you.
So far we don't have any questions. Again, everyone,
Okay.
you're welcome to submit your questions to the Q&A button. Since we are in a webinar, we don't have the chat function. So the only way we'll get your questions is through the Q&A function. If not, if for some reason that's not working, you are also welcome to raise your hand. I can give you permission to talk, and you can verbally ask your question to Anthony, have a sort of discussion on here if you wish. Again, Q&A button, and if not, you can just raise your hand and I'll go ahead and give you permission to talk. We have one from Kathy Moon. Can the presentation slides be made available to the attendees?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. How would you suggest we do that? I mean, I did include my email. In fact, actually, let's do that. So if anyone's interested in the slides, you can email me directly at ask@askmeaboutmediation.com. And let's see, I believe I don't have access to be able to share that. But Jasmine, could you possibly copy and paste my email address into the chat for the participants if they don't already have my email address?
Of course, yeah, I'll go ahead and do that.
Okay,
And
cool. Thank you.
along with those slides that we can get distributed, we'll also have this whole presentation recorded and up on our YouTube channel that you can access through our website at mediationla.org. But I'll go ahead and put Anthony's email in the chat for reference.
And if there are no other questions, that's all I have for today, Jasmine. But I'm happy to wait around a couple more minutes if any other questions come in.
Of course. Here's your email. in the chat for everyone. If you have any questions or want to follow up with Anthony afterwards, you're welcome to contact him at askmeaboutmediation.com.
Cool. And then otherwise, I see some familiar names in the chat. So for those of you I've worked with before, thank you for attending. I look forward to working with you again. For those of you that are attending that I have not worked with yet, but I know I have cases coming up with, I hope this information will be useful to you. And I look forward to working with you and anyone else. Otherwise, when your cases get referred to MCLA by the court, if you're not familiar yet with the process, somebody will be ordered essentially to start the case initiation. And when you initiate the case with MCLA and submit the case, you're asked if you would like to select a mediator or have a mediator randomly assigned. And we're otherwise randomly assigned to cases. But you're always welcome to select me if you'd like to use me in the future through MCLA or otherwise. And I look forward to working with all of you at some point in the future, or again, if we've already worked together. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Anthony, so much. That was wonderful.
Thanks again, Jasmine. I appreciate it. And everybody have a great weekend.
All right, we'll go ahead and end it there.